Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of the Two Fish at the Table Poker Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Legend One on Poker Stars.
I'm your other host, East Coast Sam. Oh,
You okay, man? What's up?
look, I'm just not looking forward to this one. CBS Sports is just so lame. PokerGo is just so lame. I mean,
Don't
they
be
just
su-
keep screwing this up.
don't be such a whine, man.
All right, if you say so. Welcome to our very special 2023 World Series of Poker main event review. We're back to the gold standard on this podcast. 20 years after Chris Moneymaker took it down, the biggest main event of all time at the time, $12.1 million up top, over 10,000 people playing it, and we're going to be reviewing it on this episode.
Yeah, and we had discussed how disappointed we were in the CBS Sports Network version of the 2022 main event, and so I had much more reasonable expectations for this one. But at the same time, I had high expectations because this was a main event that we were both actually a part of, in a sense. We were, with Adam Grosek as he played in his fourth ever main event. We were a part of his rail. We were there. We went over the stories of Vegas, meeting poker players, being there for Adams day one and in my case day two for him. And let's not forget that we were a part of a few moments of poker history because we helped contribute to a poker news reporter's story to a crazy hand that was happening on day one. Um, Sam recorded the entrance for Phil Hellmuth and Dan Jungleman for the main event. And they're all, and obviously, of course, me appearing and with Sam during Dan Negreanu's day one action, and then my appearance on day two and day three with Doug Polk and Phil Hellmuth. So again, I was kind of a little biased in my expectations and analysis of this main event. So it'll be fun to kind of to navigate where things went right, where things went wrong, where things are kind of we're gonna like regardless because we were part of it.
Yeah, I mean, going into this, I expected it to be, mostly about the time that we weren't there. That maybe there might be a quick sort of montage of day one and two. Maybe there might be a slim chance that we sneak our way into the coverage. I mean, going into this, I tried to just kind of keep my mind open. That obviously, we were both there. We both managed to see part of this. We got to meet Michael Novinsky. We got to see a lot of different people, including Daniel Negreanu. I just wanted to kind of just have an objective take on this. And yeah, I mean, we were both, we both were not in love with the 2022 main event coverage. Um, just not as much heart that was put into it as it was during the golden era of the main event coverage, which was 03 to 06. It's very corporatese, it's very slick. Some of the production values are good, some of them really aren't. We'll obviously get into sort of the editing and the sound mixing and other things as we go through the episodes. But yeah, I mean, off the bat, I just tried to keep my expectations modest, hoping that maybe that there were some little changes here and there to the editing to make it a little bit more watchable, a little bit more fun than there was in the 2022 main event.
Yeah, and so this episode, I mean, this season is again 15 episodes, three for the final table. So again, kind of settling into the same formula that the last couple main events had as far as the CBS Sports Network version of them. And again, really the strengths of this season really just come down to the strength of what actually happened during the tournament. There wasn't anything that was specific to any formula changes in the editing or anything that stood out or anything. It's just kind of, there were some pretty amazing run out coolers, big flips, etc. That I saw when I was watching this main event live, and so those are obviously still here in mostly intact in the episode. So again, nothing that there was no like stories or players that I was like, oh my God, I didn't know that player ran deep, or I didn't know that this story happened. So there weren't any surprises per se, with maybe one exception, episode one. On that note, Sam, let's get into it here. Episode one begins already with the player is in the money on day four, with a brief montage of the bubble is shown early in the episode, which includes a shot of Stephanie Sang, who was Adam Grosek's table neighbor on day one. So again, it's kind of cool to see somebody adjacent to Adam, literally and figuratively, be in the episode. And really, for the first third, two-fifths, maybe half of the season, Nicholas Rigby is kind of the main character, kind of like how Zilong Zhang was. Only I would say maybe Rigby gets a lot more screen time over more episodes, comparatively speaking. And again, I came into this season expecting to see a lot of Rigby, and I was happy that we got to see a lot of that action intact.
Yeah, Rigby's just a fun player to watch. He's personable. He mixes it up with a lot of hands. Though, this episode, he's not mixing up with, the dirty diaper. He's got, ace nine suited. He's got king eight. He's got, hands that he can defend with and do some action with. And it's a good mixture of hands in which he wins some and he loses some. He sort of, the swings that he goes on is sort of one of his big narrative pieces throughout it. We also just get, a bunch of different players. Obviously, since this is episode one, they want to have Chris Moneymaker in there. They briefly show Jamie Gold. Richard Seymour is also sort of bobs and weaves for the coverage here. And Norman Chad probably has some of my favorite lines of the whole season. Him talking about how he'll rather root for Al Qaeda before he roots for Bill Belichick. Just nice little moments here and there. Nothing super, I'm falling out of my chair laughing, but just sort of nice little things. If you could say rooting for Al Qaeda is a nice little thing, I guess.
Yeah, and there is definitely a shift in in the last couple of years away from the nuts dedicated bits. It's more about just individual interviews or Kara Scott or Jeff Platt interviews, usually if a player either on the outer tables or a player after they've just busted. So either the exit interviews or sort of like out in the ocean, let's see what fish we can find for an interview here and there. And that, it's a fairly even Kara Jeff Platt balance. I'd say for the most part, I didn't feel like one person got more love than the other. And again, Platt doesn't try to be as funny or sort of Joe Stapleton-ish in the outer fields as years past. So I didn't find either of them to be off or anything. So, and again, I'm happy to have more than one person doing interviews just to sort of mix things up here and there.
Yeah, I mean, mostly it's sort of Jeff Platt on the field versus Kara Scott. We'll do sort of bust out interviews, but also have little segments where she says, explains a little bit of a character's or a player's backstory. And then in terms of there's, in every single episode, there's usually one or two sort of interviews with a player. Sometimes it's on this stage where there's sort of a multi-camera setup, there's lighting behind them. Other times it seems like they were just sitting in front of a green screen. I definitely prefer the former over the latter. The latter just feels very lazy. They're just like standing in front of a green screen. They're like, yeah, I'm here playing the main event and I'm really hoping to run deep and my wife's proud of me and off I go. There seems to be a little bit more put into the, when they're on a stage, they'll cut to video of them, at home with their family, or they'll have like a little photograph of them, tending to apples or whatever it is they do for a living, which again, just add a little bit more life to it. It's nothing super fancy. I, again, much prefer the, in the golden era, the 03-06 setup where the player is at the table and there's like fake chips in front of them. And it just, that gives a little bit more life to it. But at least it's, again, some sort of semblance of production value that's being put forward here.
And there was a two pretty good interviews in this episode, with one with Moneymaker, one with Seymour. I thought that they actually got enough time to breathe and actually give more than just 2 sentences worth of dialogue. So I did appreciate those a bit more than the average interview the last couple of years. But for me, the main problem of this episode one is that because it's day four, there's a lot of bust outs. Tables are breaking pretty fast, and so we don't really get a chance for any of these future tables to really settle in. We do. Seymour is kind of like the main character of this episode for the most part, with Rigby being sort of also top billing up there. And again, Seymour has had a one deep run in a couple of years ago. I think it was 2019. And so is again as a Pats fan for life, I'm always happy to see any Patriot player have any success. It does seem like Seymour. I think if you check his tandem, he's definitely accumulated a few more accomplishments in the last few years. So good for him for finding something else to do with his time. Because I know a football player is going to be very hard to find something else to do in life if you don't have like business ventures or God knows what else happening in the off season when after you're retired. So good for Seymour. And but before we move any further, Sam, and this was maybe a problem for 3/5, 2/3 of the season, is basically the first few seconds of every episode, we get the introduction sequence. Lon usually says something over the music and the footage, and the audio mixing, perhaps the worst job we've seen of audio mixing in the history of the main event.
Yeah, I mean, this is a problem I had all the way through the season, is especially when it cuts to a table. Often they'll have, and you'll have two tracks, one of which is the narration track of Lon and Norm in the studio, the other of which is the players at the table bantering with each other. And you hear the chips riffling, and I kind of like that as a background effect.
Yeah.
It makes it feel a little bit more like Lon and Norm are live there in person talking over this. But this time around, for whatever reason, the mixing was completely off, where usually it'll be like maybe 85-15, 85% Lon and Norm in the studio, and then 15% the players out in the field. This time around, it was like 60-40, like players out in the field versus in the studio, where you could like barely hear Lon and Norm say anything. There are also multiple occasions in which graphics are presented on the stream, maybe a ranking of how the players are doing or more information about a particular player. And Lon will talk over it, and there'll also be music over it. But the music will be too loud, so you can't hear Lon saying anything. I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, the sound mixing was off the entire way through. And I think that's just a embarrassing error to make. I mean, you're looking over this footage, you're editing it multiple times, you have multiple people handling it. You should be able to mix the sound with a good pair of headphones so that you can hear everything clearly. It's ridiculous that this has happened.
And for the most part, this was, I noticed this most usually in the first couple of minutes of each episode. It kind of, I won't say fix itself, but it wasn't like that later in the episode as it went along. So I don't know what happened there. I listened to the episodes on PokerGo with headphones, with no headphones, and there was no like way to sort of find that there was some setting to offset this. So it's really embarrassing. And I would say it probably takes the spot for the worst. I mean, we've had a couple of production oddities over the years of watching these main events. There was that time the camera code appeared on the screen in 2018. There was the 2013 Europe main event foul table where there was no commentary at all, but it was kind of edited as if there was some. But I think that this takes the new first place biggest egregious error, because you could maybe assume that maybe they didn't mean to have commentary for the Europe main event foul table. I don't know, or they just didn't put it in. But either way, it was really bothersome. And I put in my notes for every episode, pretty much I mentioned it because it just would not go away. And I was hoping maybe, sometimes productions have different directors or a staff over the course of a production, and this is not the case for this season at all.
Yeah, and I mean, just speaking of sort of Lon's narration at the beginning of every episode, it's pretty generic for the most part. Here we are at the main event. It's so exciting. There were a couple of times where I kind of liked it, like at the start of day 8. I thought it was kind of like, here we go. We're playing on the final table. We're setting the scene. This is intense, but it's just very generic. And if you're going to do something like that, you need to add a little bit more life to it.
Yeah. As far as the actual poker action episode 1, there was maybe one hand that really kind of stood out to me, and that was Mr. Wu making a big bluff against Stephen Chidwick. And that was pretty impressive because, Chidwick's a top player. So for some guy I've never heard of to bluff them, we don't see it all that often nowadays. I feel like, some complete no-name bluffing a top player. It's a rare occurrence and just in general. So I was happy to see that hand in this episode.
That was the highlight of the episode, absolutely.
And we do see Juan Maceras at table 1, not really focused on it all, but as far as the old when does the foul table appear in the edit, that would be checking off the first box of the 9. And I want to speak to that because actually one thing that I think this main event did better than the 2022 main event was actually giving us a bit more time off the final 9, building up to the foul table. Because again, I felt like Jorstad and Attenborough were just background characters for that entire edit up into the final table. So I was glad to see that was at least, it's all coincidence, obviously, because this is just the TV tables and the other tables are barely even shown. It's just kind of luck that it happens that way. In this case, the luck went the right way.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about it as we go on and as we get closer to the final table, what the characterizations of the 9 were like. But one thing I did like is I think if you didn't know who the winner was based off of the edit, you wouldn't know until the very end. Like, I think you would kind of suspect at some time Maceras is going to win this, and at another time you'd think Adam Walton was going to win this. Not that Daniel Weinman played badly, but it wasn't like he had like a huge winner's edit like is common on a reality show. It was fairly even keeled and low key enough that you wouldn't have guessed it until the very end.
I agree with you there. And so episode 2 of this season is the conclusion of day 4, which gets the field down to about 441 players. Again, shifting around the tables a little bit. And so I should mention here that the structure of the future tables, again, you have table 1 and table 2.
Mhm.
as always. And then again, this awful table three where we only ever see maybe like an all in and a call, and then we'll see the graphic of the name of the player and the cards with the suit, in the like, D for diamond or whatever. And then we maybe get a shot of the board half the time, and then the hands maybe take like 30 seconds if that, because we're just playing up the turn and river. And similarly, again, the outer tables get very little focus besides like maybe multi-way all-ins, or maybe like a clock call in this case for episode 2. And so again, I can't stand this decision to show the outer tables, table 3 in this fashion. It just gets rid of any interest I have in those hands.
And keep in mind that this is being edited months afterward and they know what the cards are. So they can just easily have Lon say, he's got King 4 and she's got Jack 3. I mean, you can just have a line of narration or a graphic on the screen to show what the players have
And
and
the
give us a little
equity.
bit more information about what's going on. Yeah, they should just, it's high time that they add the cards to the third table and that they make a little bit more of an effort in the outer tables. I understand there's only so much you can do, but I would like to see a little bit more of that outer tables, especially if one of the final 9 is at the outer table and has a big hand. I'd like to see that.
Yeah, and I can almost understand if it's the live coverage not having whole cards shown on table 3, because you want to, maybe if there's 3 tables left, you want to rotate those players so that not everyone's seeing all their cards all every time. But then again, when you make an edited version, then you can put those on just like the olden days. We would see, even if cards were much, you'd see the blank cards on the screen, but still you see the other hand still. So just give us something here. It really, and fortunately, there's not a ton of time dedicated to table 3 now and then the other tables, but nonetheless, it just made those situations feel so much less watchable than the classic era of the main event.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, on this episode, besides the audio being off both at the start and the end of the episode, I did like there was one kind of running gag where players do fist bumps to the handshakes or when someone like busts or whatever, and I kind of liked how they acknowledged that. Again, I'm a sucker for a good running gag, a la Homester Runner, so that's always fun. The only other big highlights here would be on the outer tables. Ironically, actually, even though I said all that complaint about it, there was a 3-way all in that Seymour scoops the whole thing and knocks out 2 players. That's kind of good for him. And then there was sort of a salty Chance Corneth over a clock call on the last hand before the dinner break by somebody not in the hand. And when you factor in those 3 details, someone not in the hand calling the clock, it's the last hand before the dinner break. And just the fact that it's a big pot, I think that Corneth was right to be annoyed, even if maybe it's not like the other player is gonna change his mind about, oh, I shouldn't have done that, if you yell at him afterwards. But I understand why Corneth was upset with that situation.
I understand that too. I mean, I don't want to see anybody get into a screaming match in the middle of the main event. Obviously at this main event, we both saw a sort of not quite screaming match, but a confrontation of sorts between 2 players. That was kind of weird. I mean, yeah, do try to keep your composure. Do try to not flip out at people. We don't really know who this other guy was. Is this person an amateur? Is this their first main event? Are they used to calling the clock on people? But yeah, I mean, I can understand that Chance would be a little frustrated. Yeah, I mean, that was kind of a weird moment because Chance Corneth I usually see as a pretty even-keeled and cool dude. So to see that all of a sudden was weird. Yeah, nothing super flashy about this episode. Nikita Luther gets quite a bit of coverage. This is her sort of introduction in this main event. She talks about how she regards poker as a mind sport, so it's nice to see mind sport Olympiad kind of out there. And then the other thing I thought was kind of weird was Guy Fieri showing
Yeah.
up,
Mm-hmm.
which I guess that's just their thing now that every year they're going to have like some C or D-list celebrity show up to hype the main event. I guess it's just kind of strange. And
Yeah,
then
it's
the other thing was Cody Daniels, who was mentioned in the previous episode. He busts in this one. And again, kind of speaking of a not quite a running gag because it's not funny, but kind of bobbing and weaving through the coverage is the story of his rock, which we see sort of bobbing and weaving and being introduced. And it finally made the final table, which I thought was nice.
yeah, more on that later. But I don't recall Walton giving the rock to up when he busted on the
I
final.
don't recall that either, actually.
So
But
it might have happened, but then again, the main event is the day after break day, but after day 8, so I don't know. But in any case, this episode is kind of a Rigby Alex Foxen sort of episode, and it's kind of ironic to have Kara Scott interview Christian Foxen given the next year's main event. It's kind of a little ironic. But otherwise, we see that there's still a couple of main event champions that are going into day 5, both of which I talked to and met that main event. So again, it's always kind of cool to see that continuity. And it was around my watching of episode 2 where I think you were watching episode 1. And so I'm like halfway in episode 2. You say, Ben, check the 31 seconds in episode 1. And I had missed this my first time watching the episode. A shot of Helmuth Buster Rigby is shown in the first 30 seconds of the main event of episode 1. And the shot of me in the background as they're shaking hands is in the episode. So that's my official TV, not live stream debut in the poker world. And again, I gotta thank Sam and his superior eyesight for pointing that out to me, because that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I think you had just finished episode 2 and you'd said something to me like, "Oh, gee, I'm not in the coverage." And I said, like, go to 31 episode 1. And we had to do it at like quarter X speed just to make sure for sure that we got it. But yeah, you were there. I mean, again, just split second, but it's still very cool. I mean, I was keeping my eye out for you. I'm like, I'm watching this like a hawk, and there it was. So I'm glad that you made it into the coverage. I'm not in the coverage, but that's totally fine. I'm glad you're in it.
Next year.
Next year, yeah.
Otherwise, Rigby, his action is, he'll play any 2 cards, he'll bluff, he'll play anything. So he could literally, his ranges of the deck, so he could, make 2 pair of 4-3 offsuit and win a big pot against aces that don't, improve or something. And so his action's up and down, but even when he's down, he's not so short that he's not just one big pot away from being a big stack once again. So again, we didn't see quite as much of him in the 2021 main event. Really, it was the Dirty Diaper episode was really kind of maybe the mostly like from that point onward was where we saw him. So that was a bit later in the tournament than it was comparatively here. So going to see a lot of Rigby like this. And again, he's not as chatty as say Zilong Zhang, but I think he makes up for that for anti value with just his play and his ability to go for it and also his ability to win flips. That's very impressive too.
Yeah, I mean, most of his hands are if not premium, I mean, fairly good King Jack suited or pocket fives. Episode 3, as he, has a fairly big stack, he starts to kind of mix it up with, limping in with 9-7 when players are raising with kings and aces and little things like that. But yeah, I mean, the sort of reputation of this big player who can have any 2 cards and does whatever he wants isn't quite substantiated, I don't think.
Yeah. Episode 3 is day 5. And again, much like the last couple of main events, the number of players left at the last episode's conclusion is not always the number of players beginning at the next episode. So again, there's some skipped time, and luckily we didn't have like those skipped eliminations like we did with like Chidwick or Moneymaker in 2021. But nonetheless, it was definitely a surprise that they continued to do that, even though you'd think that there wouldn't be any sort of discontinuity there between episode to episode. As far as players that we had seen in main events past, there was at one point we had a table 2 that had Brandt and Moneymaker and Chidwick, just like we had 2 years prior. So that was a very bizarre little, double take deja vu moment for me. That was always kind of funny. With only a couple of women left in the field, though, I had forgotten that Luther was not going to be the last lady standing. I just thought that Fletcher was in Game of Gold that was why they included her. But actually, it's a player named Estelle Couillet who lasts longer than her, and this is actually an episode where she's at the TV table, and so we get to see a little bit of her as day 5 continues.
Yeah, we also have Bill Klein. This is sort of his big episode. He busts at the end of it, unfortunately. We get quite a few moments with him. We also see Joe Hashem bust, and he's sort of, I think he was the last, or no, he was the penultimate sort of main event champion left in the field. Or no, sorry, he was the last.
He was the last. He busted right after Moneymaker did.
Yeah. And you could just, I think his interview is so interesting because he's clearly gutted. And I've talked in the past about how Hashem just veers between being this like really likable, cool guy and just also this jerk, basically. And here it's like, he's not being mean to anybody, but it's like, you need to take this a little bit in stride, Joe. Just saying, buddy.
I totally agree with you, but it was kind of nice to have sort of a not super deep run of past main event champions, but the class of them did fairly well in this particular main event. So I was content with how they did. We had a couple other players go out on day 4: Blumstein, Johnny Chan, Jamie Gold, Joe Cata. So not nearly as bad as years past where they all bust before day 3 even finishes or something like that. So I'll give them props that and when you have that big a target on your back, it makes things that much hard to really repeat. And so. Points to them for doing as well they did, and for being as graceful and nice with me in Vegas, that was pretty awesome too. And you know, we didn't see Raymer. It would have been amazing to have seen Raymer that year after our interview with him earlier that same year. But nonetheless, Raymer busted on like day two, so it would have been hard for us to have seen him anyway. In this episode, though, there are a couple of pretty amazing highlights. So you mentioned Bill Klein. There was a great hand, ace queen versus aces versus kings. Bill Klein flops a king, and then ace queen rivers a straight to win. So again, just pretty wild runouts. And this was just sort of one of several that were to come, and that I remember very vividly watching live on PokerGo last year. And it was actually a pretty action-heavy table one, because Bill Klein then cracks kings of Jack nine suited. Rigby continues up and down roller coaster, and then arguably the biggest hand of the first half of this main event probably is Chance. Shortly after Chance Kornuth joins the TV table with the blinds still only at 15K and 30K. Chance Kornuth gets ace king suited on the button, while Rigby is in the big blind of aces, and Kornuth maybe overplays his hand just a touch.
Just a little. I mean, Rigby raced it to 100K. Kornuth raced it to 385. Rigby shoved over him, and then Kornuth called. I mean, again, as I mentioned, I don't feel Rigby is, punting off there with 4-3 off. I mean, he'd been playing fairly premium hands. He'd been, defending his big blind with some suboptimal hands, but this idea that he had been just mixing up with any two had not been accurate up till this point. Yeah, Chance Kornuth had just joined the table, but I think you need to really think through for a second what Rigby is doing there, and you need to just fold the ace king. I know it's a good hand, but you should just let it go.
And also, even if Rigby has 4-3, I mean, he's still probably got like 38% to win the hand. So again, that's like your best case scenario. And even then, you're risking over 100 big blinds on like a 60-40 hand. And obviously, if Rigby has like ace queen, okay, and then not so much better. But I don't think I think that's too good a hand to overplay like that. So I just think that if you broke down his range and what he would do with each hand, even when he's playing more aggressive, I just think that and he wouldn't have Kornuth would have folded away like a couple 100,000 chips if he just folds to the 3-bet. And so I think that you just got to fold and see another day. I mean, I said this month, he's not playing to ladder up. He's trying to win the whole thing. And if he wins this hand, he's going to have 6.5 million chips or something crazy like that. And so I understand that that's with a player as good as Chance Kornuth, that's going to give him a chance to run very, very deep. But you can't look too far ahead. You have to look at the hand in front of you first.
Yeah, I mean, there's still 300 people in the field. I mean, I think it's too early to say, like, I'm playing to win this thing. I'm going to get to the final table. I mean, you have to just play it hand by hand, I think, at this point. And yeah, I mean, ace king is it's just not good enough hand there.
On table two, we have a couple, pretty cool players. We have Tony Dunst and John Racner, who I still say looked so badass with sunglasses and gum in 2010. He's a little bit older now, so maybe the look doesn't quite work as well, but he's still a very talented player, and I was happy to see a couple of guys like this that we've seen in action before. Even if they get into an aces versus kings confrontation as well. And again, it's a pretty action-heavy episode. I just felt that the first part of the episode was maybe a little bit boring, and it picked up as things went on. Unfortunately, Richard Seymour on table 3, he actually busts 3 players in this episode and busts afterwards. So, obviously we're missing a lot of the action, but you have to wonder if maybe I would have liked to have seen a couple of those hands where he was chipping down, so that we could have had maybe all around pretty amazing episode. But either way, it was still an okay episode. It just could have been better.
Absolutely.
The other thing is, there was as far as the bits, there was like a montage of like the stories of day 4 and stuff, and I felt like we could have actually seen more of those stories in this edit, be a bit more present, and instead that montage kind of felt hollow. And again, like the closest thing this main event really has to a story would be the Corey Daniels story. There's not much else as far as drama or controversies. I mean, obviously Kornuth had the clock call, but if you take away that, there wasn't much as far as like headlines to really to get invested in.
Yeah, I mean, there's, maybe there are sort of callbacks to moments that occur later on. There's a lot of callbacks later on. We'll get to that later. And they kind of try to build up little storylines like they mentioned Daniel Weinman is sort of semi-retired and he's come back into the game. They try to do sort of little things to, add some spice. It just doesn't quite work because they're not sustained long enough to really have an impact on the viewer.
Right. I mean, that's like a bullet point about a player, but as far as like, big fights like Shakan Mattisau or, Raymer trying to go back to back, there's nothing quite of that caliber on display here, which again, it's random chance, it's coincidences, but, either way, I'll still point it out.
Right.
And again, I'm still enjoying the Rigby action, even if we do skip a lot of hands that he was involved in. Like prior to the Chance Corneth hand, Rigby had 7 million chips. We cut to that hand, he's at half that. So again, we're missing lots of pieces of this timeline. I really wish that they could have not skipped so much. And speaking of like skipping, a lot of skipping does happen in this episode 4 on day 5. Now we are cutting through 3 levels, so I kind of understand that you can't just show everything. But I still pointed out. There's a couple of little bullet points that really kind of I was intrigued by, not intrigued by, but surprised by. There's one is that we see a clock displayed for a hand that Rigby's part of where he's tanking. Like that's the first and only time we ever see a tank clock. Like first of all, ever in this main event, like ever. But I was surprised to see it used here.
Yeah, I mean, there are other hands later on where players were tanking for several minutes. And they mentioned during the narration he's been tanking for a while. They make jokes about how long he's tanking. It is weird that they chose to have a clock there. And I do like to kind of see the clock to really see for sure, like how long was somebody actually at the table thinking for 7 minutes? How long did it take before somebody called the clock? I kind of like seeing information like that. Again, I mean, I understand that when you're showing a hand, you're cutting, the pausing out. You want to just focus on the moments where the player goes, did you have it? I don't know what to do here. I think I'm going to fold, things like that. But yeah, it's a strange choice in that spot to have that clock and then not have it in, the Toby Lewis hand, which we'll talk about later.
And then I should mention that Rigby actually, similar to Corneth, kind of calls out the guy calling the clock because of the spot and the situation. You're a clown, but whatever. And so Rigby, I think, handles it a bit better than Corneth did, but nonetheless, again, the etiquette of the clock, I feel like there needs to be. I understand that you can't have like these are unwritten rules for clock calling, like the pot size influence how long you can wait before a clock call. You can't really put those details in the rules. So it'd be funny if we had some sort of like curb enthusiasm, like unwritten rules of poker, like don't call the clock unless A, B, and C if it's in spot 8, 1, 2, 3. But that'll never happen. But it'd be kind of funny if there was an informal version of that.
Yeah, I mean, again, this was happened on a dinner break. Rigby had apparently tanked for about 5 minutes. Obviously, the rules were rewritten after Kasuf so that you can call the clock earlier. I mean, I think 5 minutes is fine. I mean, I don't, again, I've never played professional poker, so I don't know for sure how long a tank would be, but I think 5 is okay. I think even, 6 or 7 is okay. I mean, just give Rigby the time he needs. I mean, Sachs did a lot of sort of strange things during this hand. He stood up out of his chair. He told Rigby to fold. Just kind of like a lot of just weird things during that hand that could, Rigby could pick up on and kind of has to process. So, I mean, yeah, again, Rigby didn't start screaming at the person who called the clock. There wasn't a fight or anything. He was clearly a little bit exasperated by it, but I think that's fair.
Yeah, and no, it's funny because I feel like in the clock etiquette, it depends on if it's a final table or there are multiple tables. And so I know like the idea behind a clock call in a big tournament is that other tables are playing more hands while your table is playing fewer hands. So obviously if it's hand for hand, different story. If it's a 2 hour level event versus like a online like internet poker, 5 minutes and online is like 1 or 2 levels sometimes versus this is like one like about like 4% of one level is 5 minutes. So again, different levels of it. I'd love to have maybe like a panel discussion of a lot of pros talking about all the different details of what could go into the appropriate etiquette for clock calling. But that's on my wish list there. Other than that, there is a pretty sick bluff by Vampin against final table with Toby Lewis. So he's also appearing on our final table watch here, appearing about 1/5, 1/3 into the season. He gets bluffed on while he has a ace high flush on a paired board. And I personally remember watching this hand live. I thought it was probably a call there, but he had enough chips, I think, to make the call. But nonetheless, props to Vampin for making a sick bluff there.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the most infamous hands of the whole main event. A lot of people talked about whether or not Rigby should have called, or not Rigby, excuse me, Lewis should have called there or not. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting hand again to just sort of see in the coverage. As I mentioned, they focused sort of more on when Lewis was talking to Van Pan, trying to get a reaction out of him. And they showed Van Pan showing the bluff, and then you get sort of a quick shot of Lewis's face. And Lewis, again, does a pretty good job sort of keeping his emotions, but you can tell just a little bit that he's a little frustrated with himself. And then the narration from Norm just sort of ribs him over and over the rest of the coverage. Yeah, I mean, it is really an interesting hand to see play out. It's one of the highlights of the whole main event for me.
I agree. And funny enough, Kara Scott hasn't talks about the Rigby Vampin sort of fight of sorts that happens in the episode. So that gets a fair amount of focus, I suppose you could say. And then we have an interview with Nikita Luther about doing a TED talk in India about poker. So that was kind of cool because you don't really think poker and being a TED talk really subject. But I guess in India, it could be a growing category. So you never know, that could be part of it. We also see our first shot of Adam Walton, who will be our third place finisher. And so again, now we've seen three of the final nine in a semi-substantial light so far in the edit. Just keep a track of that. And again, very little, if any, table three. I think table three is not shown at all this episode actually. And then there's like one notable hand on the outer tables in a big flip ace king against queens. The ace king makes quads despite a queen on the flops. That's pretty sick too. And it's around this time too where we'll sort of, for the next episodes, we'll see the chip leader of day 5 or the current chip leader shown, so that when we see them lose later, that's sort of a callback to their narrative of this. So again, that was a little old school, like '08 style with like Jeremy Joseph or whoever, or guys like that back then. But I would have liked more of that because we never really get a good sense of the outer tables chip counts or even just the tournament's chip average ever at any point in the tournament.
Yeah, I mean, it's mentioned quite a bit. Brian Obregon was the chip leader at 13.7 million. By the end of the episode, Zachary Hall is the chip leader. It would have been nice to have been like, okay, what exactly happened with Brian Obregon? Did he just lose a big pot? Did he slowly get wound down? Or did he lose, one or two big hands? A little bit more information would have been nice to sell that narrative and sell that running gag.
I totally agree with you. And again, so I thought it was actually a pretty good episode overall. I just would have liked to have seen a bit less of the Rigby chip roller coaster skipped as it was. And again, we knew that going into day 6, that he was on the shorter side of the chip counts compared to the last couple of days. Still playable stack, but with 131 left. And obviously, I know that he busts on day 6 early, but you still kind of hope that maybe we see some good Rigby action prior to him busting on episode 6. Unfortunately, it didn't feel like his bust was very impactful. Like I don't know, it's kind of weird. Like obviously Kasub's bust is probably for me the most impactful bust of all time given the buildup. But I was just given how much of a main character and player he was up to this point in the season, I would have liked to have seen that had a bit more oomph to it.
Yeah, same here. I mean, they spend, the start of episode 5, they're hyping up with the montage. Here's Rigby. He's this crazy player. Oh my God, it's so exciting. And so to just kind of see him bust, on a reverse straight, it's just kind of like, it just feels a little anticlimactic toward the start of the episode too. I mean, if you're going to start an episode off saying like, here's this crazy player, and then he busts within 10 minutes, I just think it's very strange.
Yeah. Additionally, at this featured table, we see Yachman. That's his first time appearing. We see Amit Makija, who was kind of appeared infrequently here and there, so I knew his name by from those. Reisner was on table 1, and then also Diego Diaquilio, who was important because he was actually at Adam's day 2 table. And so again, he kind of had a similar finish to, there was a player in 2021 that Adam played with on day 2 that made it very far. I forget that guy's name, but he made it like 35th place or something. So it was kind of funny to see that trend appear again. Besides that, I just didn't really have much to really enjoy in this episode. It just felt like there was too much of a scatter focus, given that tables were breaking so frequently. There were 3 different table 1s shown at one point in this episode. Sam Stein appears. We see Wyman, we see Yokosawa. We learn a little bit about him later on, but I don't know. It just felt like, again, it felt like too much like an abridged cut of the live coverage of day 6, like it was a year and a half ago, and not in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, there's just some stuff here in this episode about Nate Silver, who's a political pundit who I've read some of his stuff, and he's sort of hyped up toward the beginning and then he busts by the end of the episode. If you're going to hype him up a little bit, I would like to have seen a little bit more of him earlier in the coverage. He made it to 87th place, which is, pretty good run. I mean, I think it's okay to have somebody who makes the top 100, give him a little bit more of a narrative. Weinman starts to sort of he made a previous appearance on a brief graphic at the end of episode 3 in the chip lead. But this is sort of first time we actually get to learn a little bit more about him. And again, as I mentioned, you don't really know from watching this that he's going to win the whole tournament, which I like, that there's a little bit of sort of uncertainty there. Obviously, most people who are watching this know that he's won. But if you weren't watching it, I don't think you would know right away. You would probably have guessed that Rigby would have won given how much coverage he had. And so I guess that's part of the logic behind having him bust early on in the episode. Like, here's this guy we've been hyping up, and now all of a sudden he's gone. But it still just doesn't quite work with this episode, given how long the montage is at the beginning.
And probably the worst part of this episode was there was a four-way all-in on the outer tables, and it was just shown in a very hard to take in and absorb fashion. I mean, it just seems like, again, with the outer tables and table 3, it just doesn't work for me. I almost just feel like just get rid of those entirely. If you want to pan and show a player who's still in the field, not in the middle of the hand, fine. But otherwise, if you're going to show it like this, it's just not going to work for me ever.
Yeah, and this is also the episode where I started to sort of notice how annoying the flashbacks were. Like, they did a flashback to the Lewis Van Pan hand, and basically, they didn't show the entire thing over again, but they showed, the highlights, Lewis talking, Van Pan showing the bluff.
Yeah.
And that was just the first time I was like, does this really need to be seen? We just saw this in the previous episode. You can go on YouTube and watch the hand if you want. But from this point onward, I mean, they just keep doing flashbacks to hands previously in the tournament, sometimes within, the episode that occurred previously. And it just got really annoying for me after a while.
Yeah, and so speaking to the episode structure, so they have ad breaks in the episode, and so you can kind of classify episodes into parts, like in between ad breaks, and there's around the 28-minute mark. There's like usually a span where we see only like 2 hands between commercial breaks, and then at the end of that section, there's like a quick like little montage of like those 2 hands before the break. So it just really kind of annoyed me, that section of each episode, and the pattern stayed true each time.
Yeah.
And beyond that, there are the usual sort of ads at play, or Lon talking over something that's sort of like B-roll footage is playing. And luckily this time around, they don't actually show any bust outs of players during those sections. So again, that's one improvement over the year prior, where they did that on, I think, like day 7, and that really bugged me.
Yeah.
But probably one of the bigger weird pacing editing choices was at the very, very end of this episode, they show the chip counts, and then immediately it's the ending song, which was unusual, because usually there's a bit more of a build up to the end of the episode. There's like a big hand shown, but to show that the chip counts for like 2 seconds and immediately cut to the ending song and the ending of the episode, it just really kind of irked me.
Absolutely.
As we head to episode 6, we get yet another very spread-toothed episode, if you ask me. I mean, coming on the heels of a couple episodes that I thought were a little bit better, I was let down. We do see Maurice Hawkins take some focus here. He was I don't think he's not been in the main event outside of one hand, I think, in 2012, where he bust Hoyt Corkins, if I recall. But I know from other poker shows, and also he's one of the leaders in the circuit rings. I think he's like second currently with like 17 or something like that. Yep. So he's got a lot of poker chops. And he's a very talkative guy, kind of maybe embodies a few stereotypes about certain individuals in the country. But I do like his willing to put it all out there.
Yeah, I mean, Norm, I think, mentioned at some point that he can be a polarizing figure. I like him. I think he seems like a nice guy. He's, doing a little bit of trash talk here and there, but I think that's okay. I mean, there's nothing really wrong with that. He's not trying to be mean to people. He's not wasting people's time. And yeah, he's obviously a very good player, given how many circuit rings he's won and how long he's been in the poker industry. So I'm glad that he managed to have some coverage here, and I thought he was a pretty entertaining presence to watch.
Me too. I just would have liked if we'd gotten more of him earlier in the edit. But as far as edit problems, I was really annoyed at the edit for John Racer's bust. He got a pretty good focus over the last couple episodes, and to see him just busting out our tables with no fanfare was really kind of a letdown. Tony Dunn's also busted. He busted a straight flush of all things. So again, both of those guys I kind of paired together, given that they squared off in episodes past. Beyond that, I mean, we had Matt Wantman appear, who I guess I kind of knew from some of the Poker Masters tournaments, maybe, or something from a couple years ago, or whatnot, the last couple of years. And then beyond that, nothing else that really kind of got my attention this episode.
Yeah, I mean, Payne makes his first appearance in this episode. He obviously doesn't make the final table, but he runs pretty deep. Yeah, he seems like a nice guy, and it's always nice to sort of see some footage from him.
And we do lose Koyue, but in a nice moment, her entire table stands up when she's all in. They're gonna give her some respect. And again, not the deepest run we've seen from the last Little League starting, but definitely, I think upper tier as far as percentage of field remaining, not counting obviously Gail Bowman and Elizabeth Hill or even Litsu, but still very impressive for her to run this far, especially someone I've never heard of, so it's always impressive when someone I've not heard of runs this deep.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, we do have one interview from Kara Scott that does discuss the Cody Daniels rock that a player named Vora has. He'll have it for a little bit longer before passing it on. Other than that, again, it's just kind of a forgettable day six. It's a little bit different because they went to a day 8 in this main event, so day 6 isn't like the penultimate episode before the final day before the final table. But nonetheless, it just follows a pretty dud day 6 overall, even if we had the river bustings of guys, people like Luther or Rigby.
Yeah, nothing super exciting. I mean, there's no a couple hands here and there that grab my attention, but nothing that could be like, all right, I got to go and watch these episodes again to watch these moments. Just nothing in the edit that I found super interesting either.
I mean, there was one hand where Hawkins meant to raise, but the dealer deemed his bet as a call of an earlier raise in the action. That no drama comes to that, but you could imagine that something could have easily happened if a director or a player said something in that situation. But so there was the hint of maybe something would happen. Nothing happened ultimately. So maybe it's just kind of a trend for the whole day overall.
Absolutely.
With day 7, though, we do at least get, with 49 players remaining on day 7, we do see pretty much every bust out counted down. And that's kind of nice to have, because at least then you're really not missing any of the action if you know each player that's busting. Even if you haven't seen them in the edit, it's just good to kind of see them, be counted down like that. But unfortunately, again, the audio trouble is just really bugged me in this episode. And again, here we are, about halfway into the season, and this was still a recurring trend.
Very annoying. You just couldn't hear certain things. It was just ridiculous.
But other than that, I thought that the tension in the air was getting a bit more palatable for the viewing audience like me in this case. That was good. Yokosawa, kind of a nice guy, interesting character. The most popular poker YouTuber in the country, which is kind of a cool title to have. Runs pretty deep. It would maybe we could have had a Japan poker boom if he had made it even further, but nonetheless, still pretty cool to have a guy like him in the field this deep.
Yeah, he seems like a totally nice guy and very, just infectious in terms of his joy. He busts in 45, which, totally respectable. Ace King versus Ace Queen. Unfortunately, the Ace King couldn't hold. And yeah, I mean, I definitely would like to see, him more in the future and maybe even check out some of his videos.
I agree. And then probably it's not quite the most viral moment, but definitely one of the most viral non-poker moments of this main event for me was this espresso shot breathing exercise that Vampin encourages the future table to do together. And it's interesting to see a sort of like communal bonding of sorts, considering that you're technically enemies at the table. But I kind of like seeing it, and everyone kind of gives it a fair shake. No one's like rolling their eyes or blatantly or like yawning or anything funny, anything weird like that. Everyone's a part of it.
Yeah, it's a fun little moment. It's nice to kind of break the tension up, and everybody seems to appreciate it. And again, we talked about there's no nuts segments anymore. There's no sort of goofy things. Not saying that, collective breathing exercise is super goofy or anything, but it's nice that it adds a little bit of levity to the episode.
Totally, and we also see Alec Torelli for the first time in any meaningful action here, and so that's again he's kind of I'm not really sure where he falls in sort of the poker notoriety or hierarchy, so to speak. But I at least knew who he was during this main event happening live from a couple of YouTube videos I'd seen of him involved, and he also has his own YouTube channel. So I was rooting for him then. I was happy to see him in the action here, and he does a fairly good job running very far here. So props to him for his accomplishments. But otherwise, there weren't really any viral hands in this episode, but it was just some solid, okay action, given it that we're down to the last, you can kind of one hand how many tables are left.
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly, premium hands at this point. I mean, a lot of ace kings, a lot of queens, a lot of ace queen. Some players are willing to mix up a little bit. I mean, Van Pin raises with king three at one point, but nothing that's, nobody's acting super out of line. The crazy players are kind of out of the field by this point. These are really solid semi-professional and professionals and amateurs who have some experience who are running deep.
And we do see a bit of Friedrich at being at table two. Again, so I don't think he's not really any meaningful action in this episode, but at least he's, again, I think we're rounding off our final nine as far as when they appear in this season. So again, that's still a fairly good job given that we're only just under halfway into the season. Day 7 continues into part 2 with episode 8. And that gets us from 37 down to the final 3 tables, which is always kind of exciting. And it was around this point where I was in my notes beginning to write down the table breakdowns of all the rosters here for each table. I wish we had like a shot of each table with 4 tables left in this episode, but I guess that's asking too much. We did see a pretty prominent Adam Walton sort of spotlight. This is sort of where he begins to a bit more of a screen presence here, and we also see Hutchison pretty substantially, so making quads. So here we've kind of rounded off around the whole final 9 and seen everybody in some meaningful way.
Yeah, Holzner also gets quite a bit of coverage talking about being an apple farmer. He's sort of the, Chris Moneymaker, amateur, running deep, living the dream sort of character. I think that's sort of his storyline throughout. Maybe even the best sort of storyline of the final 9 that his friends bought him as a Christmas or no, as a birthday present, his ticket into the main event. He's trying to run as far as he can. And he seems like a nice guy, so it's nice to see him in here.
Yeah, and I'm looking at my notes here, and I really had no notes to speak of, or really any highlights here. It just felt like a meh episode overall. I mean, again, obviously, I'm happy that we got to see all the final table, accumulate some chips here and there, but it just wasn't much of an episode as in my notes here. Probably the most forgettable of the collection, if you ask me.
Yeah, I mean, here we are building down to day 8. I mean, day 8 is obviously, with the final 3 tables, so exciting. Every single hand matters, every single
Oh,
bust.
not quite this year, not quite this one.
Yeah. I mean, there should be a little bit more drama here, I think, as we're getting closer and closer to, the final days of the tournament. We do have a chip graphic at the end, which I appreciate, showing the top 9 players. So we're starting to get a little bit into the place where, again, every hand matters, every chip matters. And Viserys has 66 million. He's the chip leader. So he's not like the runaway chip leader just yet. But, again, we're starting to kind of see the big names step out into the coverage a little bit more. But yeah, like nothing super exciting in this episode.
And I guess what was my other note here? I think no, I guess that's really good. Yeah. Oh, yeah, but no, we had another one of those way too recent flashback montages of Maurice Hawkins. Like literally, we see stuff from the episode prior in the montage. Like it's just too soon, too recent of an episode. I mean, it's one thing if it was from a previous year. That's a little bit more forgivable. But when you're again, when you're watching this on CBS Sports Network, PokerGo, odds are you've watched the episode before it, either that day, like an hour ago, or like not so recently ago. So it doesn't make sense why they would think that that'd be a good idea.
Yeah, and the other thing as well is that we see Vora busting and handing the card protector over to Walton, and sort of gets like an explanation. Explains to Walton what it is, and Walton's like, "Okay, if I bust it, I hand it off to the next guy, right?" So which he didn't apparently. I guess he didn't do. Close enough. Into the final
we didn't see it like on camera, but again, at the final table, it's a little bit hard for that to sort of maybe get any focus on. But I'm sure someone knows online. We can probably find out if we do some research. But in any case, episode 9 gets as a day 7, it actually gets 4 episodes dedicated to it. They went the full 5 levels and playing down to however many players would be left at this point. So it gets the most episodes of any day in the entire season, actually. Again, I always put my notes here, audio issues, the music cues just being off, too loud, making no sense. I actually kind of dug the Lon Norm dialogue, perhaps the best of the entire season. I didn't write down anything particular, but I just wrote my notes. This is probably my favorite iteration of their banter in this season. With Fam, one of the last players, he does make a pretty surprising comeback, going back from less than 1 big blind up to 10 big blinds. That was pretty impressive. And then I did have some pretty good highlight lists here for some pretty big hands and bluffs on table 2. That was probably the highlight of this episode was the table 2 action.
Yeah, table two definitely takes precedence over table one in this episode. Not that table one's super boring or anything, but yeah, I mean there was quite a bit of action here because again we're coming down to the penultimate day. This is the big deal. This is every hand really matters. Every chip you can win matters. So these players really definitely swung for the fences on this day.
Yeah, it was kind of a Friedrich and Jochman focused episode in a lot of ways. And then we also had once again the victim of maybe the worst editing omissions of all time, Andre Patachuk. He ran so deep in 2011, got literally like 2 minutes of screen time, and then here again he actually appears on table three, but we don't actually see him in action at any meaningful time until he busts in a later episode. So again, I'm for Patachuk. Nobody else in the world cares, but I feel for you, Patachuk. I wish you got more time in the spotlight.
Fair enough. Yeah, absolutely.
Beyond that, we don't really see too much else in the way of viral moments or anything. I mean, we see Weinman with another set of a set situation win a big hand here, which again he takes advantage of some big spots, and it's one thing to get over set, it's another thing to double up through it. And it's not always some players slow play, some players bet too small and don't get raised or something like that. He manages to get the max value in these big spots.
He gets set over set with jacks of all things. So Daniel Wyman just knows how to play pocket jacks.
Absolutely. And then episode 10 is the countdown until the final 15 players for day 8, even though it's really just however many players are left over. And they will make a big deal about, oh, this is the first time ever that day 8 has been required for the main event, which is not the case. If you recall, in 2009 and 2010, they played, I think 2011, they played till day 8. So that's totally false, by the way. It's just a matter of they changed the structure a bit. Even then, it was still 8 days back then. In this case, we have 3 tables before they redraw down to the final two tables. I did like that in this episode, the first 3 hands shown, we got 1 hand from each table. That was kind of nice. I would have liked if we could have had the sort of balance more often. In another case, we see the continued rise of Juan Maceras, and then, like I said before, we see literally 0 of Patrick until the hand he busts on. Very unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, this episode is really sort of Maceras, cleaning up, really consolidating his stack. As I mentioned earlier, he was already the chip leader, but here he really starts to pull ahead of the pack. He's at 95 million, about 2/3 of the way into the episode. And then by the end of the episode, he's up to 108 million, with Walton being a number 2 at 75 million. So Maceras was like, this was his tournament to lose. Like, he was going to clean up. We also get a nice segment where he explains that his father was big in online poker, was actually number 1 in the world at some point, and then Maceras started playing poker, and his dad didn't know that he was playing poker, so one day they kind of ran into each other, which I thought was a nice story. Maceras comes off like a really nice guy.
Yeah, I felt that the back half of this episode was actually much better than the first half. There weren't really any impactful bust outs. And when I say impactful, I mean a player that we know from years past, busting, and we're like, oh my God, I thought we were going to win, or a player that got always, had a dramatic, roller coaster up and down the chip counts and busted, or was, like Scott Main in 2014. That was an impactful bust out because he had doubled up a couple times, shipping up, and then right before he can be a big player, he goes out on the river. Stuff like that. Nothing quite happened. And Josh Payne, he was kind of like the chip leader before Maceras was, and even when Maceras went above him, he still had a lot of chips. We don't really see his decline here. He drops down the chip counts in kind of an invisible edit, so we don't really see him decline, which would have been nice to have seen.
Yeah, I mean, he ends this episode at 31 million. He had 10 more than Wyman had at the end of this episode. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of him, especially given that they gave him so much time in previous episodes.
And actually, to correct you, Sam, Das had inherited the rock from Voira, and then he
Yeah.
hands that to Walton in this episode here. So that's the trajectory of the rock at that point. And then, so again, I recall being very excited for day 8, watching this live with only 15 left, seeing who could make it in there. I put in my notes this time around where everyone fell on the 1st to 15th as far as the chip counts to sort of compare, how they did relative to their chip stacks. And unfortunately, most of the shorties did go out in the first few spots. But to my surprise, Fam, who was the short stack to begin the day out, actually does get the first bust out of the day. And then unfortunately, he doesn't last too much longer. But nonetheless, it's always impressive when the short stack can not be the first one out and also gets a KO.
Yeah, I always love seeing how the short stacks play on this day. Do you swing for the fences here, or do you try to play conservative? And Holzner, I mean, was pretty much a short stack pretty much all throughout days 7 and 8. So to see him make the final table, even though he busted in ninth, is I think pretty impressive. Hutchinson also wasn't a huge stack the whole time. Pretty much everybody else had their moments where they were pretty good. Wyman ended day 7 not as a big stack, but obviously managed to run it up during day 8. So I mean, it was a good sort of mixture of stories in terms of there were some players who started off really strong and wound their way down before they made the final table, and other players who managed to chip up.
Yeah, I agree. And there was also some pretty good table talk. And this, I felt like the table talk and the pleasantness of the tournament really from here on kicks another gear up, where I feel like there's a good sense of gentlemanship and respect and whatnot around the table. So that was good to see. We don't always get that. And there was a couple of notes I had about table one after. There was obviously the Wyman hand, jacks against queens against kings, and then Payne bust. And that kind of felt like the first like big real bust of this entire season, which is unfortunate that it took 11 episodes to get to that point, because he was a pretty prominent player when he had a big stack, and we knew that he had been a big stack and then had fallen into a short stack. So that was again pretty cool. So, and even then he was still 8th in chips to begin day 8 out of 15. So still not in bad shape at all. And then there was a hand where Aguilera misses a hand because he's talking to his rail, and he makes kind of a big fuss out of it, saying like he tried to argue to the director that like because we're in the main event, there's 2 tables left, like the rules shouldn't apply because of the situation. Well, in that case, man, he's just trying to find a scapegoat for his own mistake.
Yeah, I mean, going to the Kings, Queens, Jacks hand, which is probably the hand of the entire main event, certainly the most viral, but a very consequential hand. I mean, I was really curious to see how they would handle this in the edit. Would they try to hype it up? How exactly would they handle it? And I like the fact that again they didn't really give anything away until the hand happens. And again, if you didn't know that Wyman had won the hand, I don't think you would have known until that jack came up on the turn. And they tried to kind of hype it up afterward to saying like it's the turn of the century. It's this is the most important thing ever. Which, I mean, yeah, obviously it was an important turn card. Without that turn card, Wyman doesn't make it to the top. But I don't know. Turn of the century feels a little bit drastic. I mean, they're trying to have it be like bluff of the century, like Chris Moneymaker's bluff against Sam Farha in 2003. That was a little bit more of a juicier hand than this one. This was just Wyman hitting a lucky jack. There was a little bit more skill involved in the bluff of the century. But all things considered, I mean, I'm pretty happy with how they handled the edit of this. Not so much in terms of them recapping to it over and over again as the coverage went on. Quite a few recaps in this episode, actually. I mean, there was a Messeris recap. There was another recap afterward. There was a recap to Walton doubling up. I mean, just too much time spent showing us hands that we've already seen.
Yeah, and there was like a stories montage of like recapping the first the last couple episodes of stories, and it was a pretty weak montage. Like that's literally all he had to show us, and it just kind of embodies the lack of any true story or narrative in this main event, which is unfortunate. But it is but they can't fabricate footage, but at the same time they also don't have to put a montage in when there's nothing really good to show. As far as the other bust outs in this episode, we lose Payne, we lose Pham, we lose O'Neill, and we lose Joshi. And again, besides Payne, I don't really feel like any of those guys had like substantial presence in the action or anything. So I didn't feel bad for them, or and it's unfortunate. I mean, it just I always say I want the last like 9 bust outs of the main event to mean something to me, and really once again we don't really get that in this main event.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame that again these guys who make it almost all the way to the end don't really have the respect that they get in the edit. I mean, even Aguilera, who finishes in 10th, I mean, based off of this edit, you kind of just see him as like a hothead. This guy who should have folded the queens number 1 during the turn of the century, and then number 2 got up out of his table, got up out of his chair when he shouldn't have. And yeah, like I understand that some fans got really mad at Aguilera for what he did. And yeah, he should have, again, kept his composure and known what the rules are. But like, I don't hate Aguilera for what he did there. I mean, I understand that he got a little bit riled up. It was a big moment for him. But it's also like he didn't have aces there. It'd be one thing if the dealer, imagine if he'd been dealt aces on that hand and he had to get those mucked. That would have been crazy. But it was 2 rags. So, I don't see that hand as a really big deal as everybody else did.
No, I don't think so. I just put in my notes as a very unique sort of situation that we don't see too often. I did feel it was a little cheaped or like a little ripped off that we didn't see any of the tanking that was so present in this day of action in real life. But they were playing hand for hand. They had multiple players like in the bottom 3 or bottom 4 spots on the chip counts that had like 10 big blinds or less, and they were all tanking to try to ladder up. And we didn't get any sense of any frustration or any slow play or any even acknowledgement from Lon or Norm in the booth about how that had been a trend all day long. I would have liked at least some acknowledgement of that, because that was a big factor in the gameplay of that day.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, everybody, again, as you mentioned, everybody seems pretty polite to each other. There wasn't, anybody who was really jousting verbally. The one thing I sort of did notice, starting from this episode moving onward, was this almost like passive aggressive attitude between Yachman and Walton. They kind of just seemed to, again, nothing super mean or anything, but I noticed that there's just kind of like this one hand here where Yachman has aces and Walton has king three, and Walton puts out 14 million on the river after it went check, 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 check twice. And then, Yachman just kind of jousts with Walton a little bit. They say, like, I don't know what you have. Walton had been doing this sort of cheer, and Walton said, the only chance you won't hear a cheer is if you call. Like, that to me was sort of the most interesting dynamic between two players throughout the entire main event. Because, again, it was amicable enough, but there's like a little bit of passive aggressive tension there, which, playing into their last hand together, I think that might have played a factor in why Walton did what he did in that last hand.
Very possible. I remember that, and I definitely remember thinking there's some psychology there going on. I agree. Beyond that, there was one, like, again, probably the biggest glaring error by Lon all season was when Pham busts out in 13th place. According to Lon, it was actually 12th place. And I just can't believe, when there's literally only 4 bust outs in this episode and you're showing them in sequential order, that you would say 13th, 13th. I mean, just read over these scripts, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big post-production error. I mean, I don't understand how you can make a mistake like that. Just ask him to re-record the narration if he misspoke while recording it for the first time. Pretty easy fix.
Yeah, pretty bad. And that gets us to the usually pretty exciting final table bubble episode. In this case, 11 players playing on 9. So not quite 10 out of 9 like in 2018 or anything, but still, only two spots away. It's a pretty heavy Holzner focus. He's one of the short stacks. He's only got 4 million, which is 4 big blinds by episode's beginning. And so I'm obviously rooting for him as the short stack. And Juan Maceres is the chip leader for 137 million. Again, 137 big blinds. So it's fitting that, perhaps two of the biggest chip movers are the top and bottom, very top and very bottom of this episode.
Yeah, I mean, I remember watching this live and thinking to myself, okay, Maceres had been playing really well. He's got a lot of chips. He's going to finish in like the top 5 no matter what. Like, he's just going to steamroll everybody. And again, props to the editors for, again, making Maceres, again, giving him this big edit, having this big chip stack. But in this episode, I think they do show his, fall during that final table bubble fairly well. I mean, obviously some hands and some moments are skipped, but you do definitely get a sense through the edit and through the narration over it of his, decline as he gets to the end.
Yeah, and it's funny because he actually, Maceres busts Torelli in a flip, Torelli out in 11th place. So again, he's, chipping up here. I didn't really notice the table dynamics of the final couple tables really, as far as one tail being a death zone, or one player, having the whole table out chipped or something like that. Nothing before that really happens in this case, like a Joe McKeon or Jamie Gold type thing. But once we get to the after the busting out of Torelli, we have the bubble, which is the last 2/3 of the episode. It took about 2.5 hours in real time of poker, so about level and change of time. Maceres had 141 million when there was 10 left, so it was up a few million from 11-handed play. Holzner had doubled up once, and Aguilera had doubled up earlier, so they were still kind of a bit more in the mix. Holzner still only had 8.5 million, but that's still gives you a couple orbits before you have to go all in, I suppose. But then in the very first hand of the bubble play, we see a pretty crazy runouts to allow Holzer to survive.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate this hand has to come, so early into the episode. So obviously, as an audience member, you're not tricked into thinking like, oh, Holster's going to go bust. But yeah, this is just a fun hand to watch anyway. I mean, a 10 comes on the flop. Holster uses his one time manages to double up. And again, kind of Adam Walton, like a little bit passive aggressive. He says like it has to be like the coolest thing, when you can tell like they all wanted Holster to go broke and make the final table, of course. So again, just a little bit of passive aggressive there from Adam Walton.
Yeah, he loses like 10 million to Holzner there, and so
Mhm.
he still has a huge chip stack. Holzner is still a short stack, still very handcuffed. But unfortunately, Maceres just seems to want to continue to bluff and risk his chip lead. I mean, he has enough chips where you can make some bad plays and still have chips left over. But nonetheless, you have to imagine if he had maybe been a bit, I understand being aggressive pre-flop on the flop, but then by the river, guys like Wyman are going to pick you off if they have a read on you, in which case Wyman's a good enough player to have a read on Juan Maceres very well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big hand where Maceres is bluffing when Wyman has a straight, and just so many unnecessary. I mean, Wyman, after hitting his straight, he bets 5.5 million. After you've Maceres bets 3 million on the flop, and Wyman calls with his straight draw and hits the straight. Like, what is Wyman betting with there, right? And you have Queen 10. I mean, Wyman, for all you know, could have King High, and he has a better bluff than you are, right? It's just not a good spot to be betting 16 million. At least he shuts down on the river. So, and he was still had a decent stack by the end of the hand. But just little mistakes like this is ultimately what undoes Juan Maceres at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And then in between all this Maceres dropping, Holzner finds another double up to get to 38 million. But ironically, he's still only in ninth place after that double up, which is kind of surprising given it's a fair amount of big blinds by this point. And it kind of speaks to that for the last, like for the final two tables onward, you kind of had this big discrepancy between the top like four stacks and the bottom like eight stacks. You had, very healthy chip leaders and very short stacks. And props to Holster for kind of getting out of the basement there. But it just, he's got a lot more work to do, obviously, with only in ninth place at that point. There was we don't see too much of Hutchinson really all main event long, but there was a boat versus boat cooler with Yachman where probably the smallest pot possible gets shipped to Yachman, and as a result of it, very impressive for Hutchinson to lose the minimum there, I suppose. But nonetheless, on these sort of bubbles of the final table, I'm just surprised to see those kind of run-ins.
Absolutely.
Meanwhile, notice I don't think we have once said Stephen Jones's name,
Oh yeah.
and it's not because he's not shown in hands. It's that he just doesn't really do anything to really stand out. Like it's kind of funny. Like the top three stacks for the final table and the final three, Walton, Jones, and Wyman, they all kind of are kind of nice average guys. There's really nothing unique about them. I mean, they're all kind of like, jovial, easygoing, solid poker players, but they don't really, and they were the only Americans at the final table, but they all kind of just are kind of this homogenous sort of like presence in this tournament.
Yeah, I mean, they try to hype up Walton as kind of the crazy guy who will just, punt off with a big stack. Obviously, Wyman has the turn of the century, so they hype him a bit. Jones, yeah, I mean, he's a nice enough guy. Obviously a pretty good poker player to get second place in the main event. But yeah, I don't really have what is there that's distinct about him. He had like a real estate company or something. He ran deep in the Colossus. I think he got fourth in that or something. I don't remember for sure, but yeah, like he seems like a nice enough guy, but there's really nothing you can hang his hat on. There was no moment where he said something interesting or made a cool play. It was just kind of like, yeah, he was a good guy who managed to get a bunch of chips and just, managed to make the final table.
Yeah, and Walton, I think he had made like a 41st finish in the main event like 2 years prior. So he had, this has been
Mhm.
his new deepest run. So he was, familiar with the pressure, you could say. But I guess we'll discuss the final table in a second. But really, the main two takeaways from this main event bubble was Lewis getting, sinking, Maceres dropping, but still having a fair amount of chips even after the 10th place finisher bust out, which is Aguilera. He busts ace jack to a lucky Yachman ace eight, which I'm actually kind of surprised Yachman made that call. I think I personally fold that spot there, even with uh,
Mhm.
as short as Aguilera was. I think ace eight. I mean, really, either you hit an ace or you're kind of screwed if you're up against any pair, really. So I probably make that fold there. But Aguilera, again, we didn't see too much of him. We obviously there was the missing a hand gate of sorts, but again, one of the less memorable final table bubblists, even though it was on a bad beat.
Yeah, I mean, the final table bubble itself I thought was pretty exciting, and I appreciate that they had over half of an episode dedicated to it because again, you genuinely didn't know who was going to bust at the end. But yeah, Aguilera again seems like a nice guy beside that one moment. Don't have anything really else to say about him.
Yeah, like I think I probably put him like third lowest on my bubblists hierarchy. Like I think there was Garfunkel in '07, and then there
Yeah.
was Josh Weiss in 2016.
Yep.
Again, so I think he's above those two because he was a bit more present, but still, bottom of as far as 10th place finishers in the main event.
Hmm.
So getting to the final table here, we had a pretty large gap in the chip counts. The blinds were 600K, 1.2 million, which meant that Toby Lewis was a short stack with less than 20 million. So he has like 16, 17 big blinds. So, pretty short, but at least 900 you can, fold a few times. And then Walton of 144 million. And he was fairly active in those last couple of episodes. So it wasn't like he's the chip leader. That doesn't make sense to me. No, that made sense to me. Jones, we don't really see him losing too many hands really at all. So I guess it kind of makes sense to need a lot of chips. But guys like Weinman, like he won a couple of those big, pocket jack spots. So I guess, he's had a lot of chips there. Yachman, we saw, a fair amount. He's was a previous bracelet winner, one of only two. Him and Weinman had really only two, if any, bracelet wins. And he also, I think the oldest one of the oldest players remaining the final table, which was I think a fairly old one. Maceras we saw, up and down, so that was fine. Friedrich and Hutchison, I feel like they're kind of also on they're probably the most forgettable two of the final nine. It's just that the other three Americans up top are kind of more homogenous. It kind of depends on how you look at how you recall these players.
Yeah, I mean, Predik is Ukrainian. I don't think he speaks much English, so he didn't have any interview segments, which is totally understandable. I think in years past they've hired translators. Like I remember Quy Win, they hired a Vietnamese translator and they translated his stuff. I think they could have done that with Predik, so you have a little bit more of his personality. He also just seems to have been a little bit more reticent, a little bit more calm. Yachman is a little bit more expressive. Walton's a bit more expressive. So obviously they would get more screen time, but it would have been nice to have seen some moments with Predik. Hutchinson does have one funny moment where it's just about his Scottish accent and how other players at the table didn't think he was speaking English because of how thick his accent was. I thought that was kind of funny. But yeah, I mean, even Toby Lewis, I mean, who again was probably the most high profile player at the final table, didn't really get like a whole lot of big moments beside the Vampin bluff. We didn't really, he talks a little bit about playing golf with Weinman and has a couple small moments here and there. But even then, like I felt his edit was pretty small given he was kind of the headliner for this table.
Yeah, and Holzner, he got a fair amount of short stack day 8 coverage. So I felt that he was relevant in a meaningful way despite being 8th in chips to be in the final table. With this lineup, watching it live, I didn't really have any preference to what that would definitely take it down. Obviously, you lean towards the chip leader being the favorite, but things can always change. Look at Luan Maceras, for example. And it was funny. I was kind of in a facetious, sarcastic way rooting against Maceras. Like, he was this big chip leader with 10 left, and he's going to go out in 9th place. That could have been funny. He doesn't quite go that horribly, but fairly close to that. And again, as far as final table, rosters go, it definitely for me kind of ranks towards the bottom. I didn't really care for these players at all. Obviously, I knew Toby Lewis from the quads versus quads hand. That's kind of a viral thing from some like UK poker show. But otherwise, I just even both watching it live and watching the edited versions, I didn't really have like a favorite of mine that I was really gunning for besides the short stacks being underdog story.
Yeah, I mean, I always sort of root for the least experienced player, so I was rooting for Holzner to win. I thought Yachman, when I was watching this live, had played fairly well, so I thought that maybe he would. I didn't know for sure that he was going to win, but I thought that he would do pretty well at the final table. I thought Wyman had been playing well, so I figured, he might do well. But yeah, I didn't have any horses in the race. I didn't have anybody I was super gunning for. Nobody really just sort of stood out as a new player to me like in previous years. So yeah, I mean, watching this live, I didn't really have any strong feelings either way, which can be kind of a nice thing. Like, I'm not latched onto one player. I'm willing to watch all 9 of these guys and see what happens. And same with the edited version. Again, I didn't have anybody that watching these edited videos, I didn't think like, oh my God, like Walton is such a cool guy now. Like I have to, I'm so excited to see how he is at the final table. Nobody was really stood out to me as a huge personality.
Yeah, as far as now the next part here, the pay jump to the final table, I don't really have any issues with them per se. I just feel like Hollister might have been robbed of $100,000 because usually the final table is to get $1 million, so he only gets 900K, so that Wyman can make 12.1K. I mean, you could have taken that 100,000 from second place or something like that just to give the 9th place finisher an even million. But in any case, with the foul table being broken down into 3 episodes, I kind of like having it be in 3 episodes. That means things don't get rushed. But at the same time, this final table was one of the quicker final tables to finish. Like the whole thing only took about 164 hands, which
Mhm.
that might sound like a lot, but that's actually, pretty short compared to the average final table. Usually we get in the 200, 300 range, more if there's like really lengthy heads-up battle. So as a result of that, the overall the collection of the final table I thought was one of the weakest ones we've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, this episode in particular, episode 13, is pretty weak. A lot of montages, a lot of flashbacks, a lot of just useless stuff. There was, a couple little segments I liked. There's a segment toward the beginning of the episode, which the players posing with the
Yes,
bracelet.
that was pretty cool.
Everybody's really superstitious and really nervous to hold this bracelet. And Maceris is asking, like, how much is this worth? This is worth $500,000. I really like that. They should do that in future years. That was a lot of fun to watch. But beside that, I mean, there were flashbacks to Holzner hitting the queen. There was flashbacks to Jack's Queen's King's turn of the century. You
Mhm.
don't need to include this stuff. If you don't have enough material for an episode, you don't need to make an episode. I'm pretty sure they didn't sign a contract with CBS News to say you have to have 15 episodes. I'm pretty sure CBS would let you get away with 14. Just saying.
Plus, they had this weird thing for only the final table where they had the GTO Wizard of the Day, which is they had done in seasons before with like a different sponsor, player of the day or whatever, but for the final table. And I just was surprised. Like, I mean, I'm happy they didn't do it for the whole system, but I just feel like, what's the point of only having it for the final table?
Yeah, I wrote question mark, question mark, question mark next to it because I just thought it was weird. I
Yeah.
don't understand why they did that. Again, just to pad out time and get a sponsor happy.
Yeah, and so this episode only gives us 13 hands, and only, and to my surprise, we see literally zero of Friedrich or Hutchison. And considering that they both survived the episode into the final six, you'd think that you'd want to give a little bit of each player get one hand, at least if they could have just call a two bet and then fold on the flop. Just give me a little bit of each player, so that we feel like we've seen the whole final table at work.
Yeah, I mean, those two were the least active players by far. It definitely seemed like they felt like they were laddering at the final table, which is okay. But I would have liked to have seen a little bit more from them. It almost becomes a joke at some point that they're not playing any hands, it's a little mean, I think. Again, they're trying to ladder up. It's a lot of money at stake here, so I think that's totally
I
fine.
mean, that's why I laughed pretty hard when the very first hand, episode 14, was both of them playing in a hand against each other because they
Yeah,
here at the same time. And it's a
that's
a
funny.
relatively small pot, but still a win. We lose three players in episode 13. We lose Holzner, Maceris, and Lewis, and they were Holzner and Lewis were the bottom two stacks. So you kind of expect them to go out first. But again, Toby Lewis can't quite shake off the top pro goes out in seventh place curse that we're always talking about. In his case, at least he was ninth in chip, so it's technically, mathematically a good thing he was out in seventh place versus going out in ninth. But nonetheless, I would have just once for this not to happen to the guy I was rooting for to make it not in seventh place.
It's okay. This year's main event, there was not a professional who finished in seventh, Ben. Just remember that.
That's right. Anyway, and then obviously Holstner, he was eighth in chips, goes out first, but he somehow managed to avoid losing with aces against a set of 10. So I got to give him props to avoiding that pitfall. Most players would have just gone broke right there, and it would have lasted considerably less. Uh, Otherwise, Maceras was fairly active. You'd think he kind of had this weird stack where he's got a good number of big blinds. He's got like 50 plus big blinds, but so he's trying to play his game, but at the same time, you have some short stacks below you, and so I feel like maybe don't bluff, maybe just sort of play your strong hands, well, but don't risk with nothing when you're trying to get out of that middle ground in the chip counts.
Yeah, I mean, he seemed very confident in himself. There's a little interview with Jeff Platt as Maceris is walking, and he's like, "This is destiny for me. I'm going to win this." So yeah, I mean, even if you're that confident in yourself, I do think you need to scale things down, read your players a bit better. I mean, he wins a couple pots here and there, but yeah, it's pretty much a steady decline from the overwhelming chip leader, guy to beat, knocks out Trilly in 11th place. He's in a super strong position to be in that position in 10th place to bust in the eighth is pretty bad.
And ironically enough, Lewis busts Maceras in eighth place, and yet he's still the one to bust out next. So It's kind of funny how, that happened in Tilt once. We thought it was unrealistic, but actually maybe it's not quite as unrealistic as we thought after all, Sam.
Yeah, Tilt got something right. Look at that.
Episode 14 gets us from 6 down to 3. And again, this foul table was broken into 2 nights. The first one, 9 down to 3, and then 3 down to a winner. So I didn't mind that. That's how they broke down the episodes. I remember in 2011 they did that kind of weirdly, what they didn't do it so cleanly. And so otherwise, this episode at least had less montage and less filler in it. So I guess that's a good thing. But at the same time, I didn't think that it was a particularly memorable episode. Really, still, I thought it was pretty meh. I think we had maybe 1 or 2 more hands than the episode previous, so I guess the pacing was a little bit faster. But this sort of began the last 3 bust outs. We kind of criticized about how they all were kind of the same thing over and over again, and we only have to watch one of them. So Yachman, he was a fairly confident player and playing pretty well for the majority of this final table until the last few hands of this episode where he just loses over and over again to Jones mostly.
Yeah, I remember I had stopped watching when there were about, I think, 5 players left. And from how Yachman had been playing, I said to myself, like, I think he's going to win. Like, I really think he's doing super well. So when I woke up the next day to discover that he busted in 4th, I was like, what the heck, dude? Yeah, I mean, he kind of blew it. I mean, I don't want to go so far as to say that he, absolutely blew it. He was never the chip leader, but I really think that if he had picked his spots a bit better, he could have finished in the top 3 for sure, if not had a chance of winning. Unfortunately, it just didn't work out. Predict and Hutchinson, yeah, I mean, again, as I mentioned, they were the 2 most passive players. They kind of just, they bust out in, ignominious fashion, nothing super fancy with either hand. Though, it is sort of interesting to note that when Predict goes all in, Wyman calls, there's like big USA chants, and kind of Norm pointed out it's like a little xenophobic kind of what was going on. Like Predict surrounded by all these people who are chanting USA and high-fiving each other while he's just sitting there with his main event at stake. I think that was important for Norm to point out. I like that he did point that out.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny how after Hutchinson busts, Friedrich definitely kind of changes his game up a little bit. He's a bit more aggressive, and it doesn't work for him. But it's kind of similar with Yachman, where before they bust, they kind of maybe made some moves that they maybe wouldn't have if they had stuck to the game plan from before. But in either case, it ends the night with 3 players left, the 3 Americans who were again with the top 3 chip counts when the final table began, and they're all fairly even in chip stacks with the action to begin the next day. So it's not like you had a runaway chip leader or the other 2 are going to fight for second place. No, they all had a lot of big blinds in play, and they all it was anyone's game at this point.
Yeah, at the start of the last day with these 3 players who were essentially even, I mean, only 70 million apart. I remember saying like, okay, this is going to go long. Like this is going to be a really long 3-handed action. All 3 of these players, again, like they're not, world class, oh my God, A-list players, but I felt that they had all acquitted themselves fine. They were pretty good players. So I was expecting, this to go all night pretty much.
Yeah, and the entirety of the day was only 45 hands long. About half of that was 3-handed, and the other half was heads up. And the biggest problem with this episode is that we get a good number of hands for each, 3-handed play, 2-handed play, but the dynamic of the table never really changes. The chip stacks don't really change that much. The chip leader is still a chip leader. The chip short stack's still kind of short stack. No one's leapfrogging each other all in call. I double up through you. Now you're all in. Now I call. Now you double up. Nothing that really happened. They're just kind of these small to medium pots that happen where the chips don't just kind of like as if they each had like 100+ million of chips, maybe 180, 170, 200. It's as if you took like 150 aside from each player and they played with the other 50 million and just was swapping that amount. That's kind of what happened.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely how it happened, and then Walton punts off in that spot. I don't know how else to put it. I mean, he punted off pocket 8s there. Wyman again had not been playing super out of line. If he's raising after, I mean, Jones raises to 6 million, Walton calls, Wyman raises to 27 million. I mean, what is Wyman doing that with, raising when a player is already called a raise? I just don't understand that at all. And it really, again, 3-handed action could have, I think, really been exciting, as you mentioned, could have been a lot of swings. And to just see that happen was just, I remember watching that live just being like, what the heck just happened?
Yeah, I mean, 84 big blinds on a 4-bet shove with pocket 8s. I mean, I understand that you're trying to get a lot of 2 overcard hands to fold, but it's pocket eights. Like I mean, even tens, I don't think he should be doing that move with, and
Yeah.
maybe tens is too strong to try to force out to fold. But even then, I just feel like Walton, I think he's too good a player to just put it in a high variance spot like that, where you're gonna be, yeah, you're gonna get some folds some of the time, but you're gonna be dominated and called a lot of the time too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And ironically, as much as I was disliking the poker action, I actually really appreciated some of the bits that were happening in the first part. So we had the Jeff Platt curse acknowledged by Weinman with a little
Mhm.
restraining order as a kind of a fun little side joke. And then Doyle Brunson's passing was acknowledged and discussed by a few players. That's was very touching. Tony Dunst, Moneymaker, Torelli, Elliot Lesra talk about him. So that was pretty nice. And I was a little surprised to have it included here. But nonetheless, I'm happy that it was included here.
Yeah, I mean, it's my favorite part of this whole episode. I really wasn't expecting that. I really appreciated that they did that. Doyle Brunson, obviously a huge legend of the game, so I really like that they were able to stop a moment and just have him talk about his legacy.
And then with heads up play, Jones has got 160 million versus Wyman's 443 million. I think the blinds were like 1 million, 2.5 million. So again, so Jones still has plenty of chips to play with. Heads up, that's totally fine. And we see a total of 5 hands for heads up play. So that's I think kind of above the standard deviation. Usually we only would see one or two or three in the olden days, and we had some episode long heads up matches sometimes. So this is kind of again in that middle ground, 5 hands. The problem is the first few pots shown are just pretty small and insubstantial. And again, the heads up dynamic never really changes in any of those hands. At least in that like European 2011 or whatever with Chris Moorman, where he was like losing hand after hand. That at least had stood out in that way because he was losing like 10 hands in a row. In this case, nothing really changes heads up when with the hands shown. We don't really get a sense of their game plan or like a Gordon Vail versus Clee Win, two polar opposite approaches to poker squaring off. We never really get that. So then when the final hand just kind of happens, and again we see just kind of an overly aggressive, probably time shove, much like Yachman and Walton, it just kind of just happens. I don't really feel like it was a substantial hand in that fashion.
Yeah, I mean, this heads up action was very interesting. Wyman had the lead. Jones was the amateur. I kind of just figured Wyman would win it. And sure enough, that's what happened. And yeah, the last hand was just really weird. I don't really know what Jones was thinking there. I mean, he'd said afterward in an interview with Jeff Platt that, oh, like Wyman could have had a combo draw there, could have gotten him off that. Why? Why would you think that? I mean, Weinman raised you on the flop. He bets big on the turn. I mean, even if he does have a combo and you're 70% favorite, do you want to take that risk? 30%, I just don't get it. Yeah, it was just kind of an anticlimactic hand to end the tournament.
Yeah, I mean, it reminded me a little bit of the Edinburgh Yorstad hand where it just kind of ends all of a sudden. That just kind of felt like that. It was a similar sort of ending, and then also with Aldemir, again that was again just kind of this so many chips going in the river that it's nice not to have like the short stack has like 10 big blinds that goes all in with 2 cards and loses, but it's just again it just didn't feel like a dramatic dynamic final hand of any sort. It's like I want like a back and forth fall in, no he's ahead, now he's ahead type thing. It's not too much to ask for, right?
Yeah, I mean, a hand like the '04 main event where like there was just so much, you know, kept improving on every street until the end. That was just really cool. But,
Yeah.
I understand that there's only so much they can do. Obviously, they can only show the last hand as it actually happened. They can't make up some exciting hand where it's, straight flush over a full house or something. But it would have been nice if there had been a little bit more meat on this last hand.
Yeah, and so as a whole, it's honestly maybe one of the weakest, worst final episodes of a main event we've really had, if you ask me. And even just the foul table overall, there weren't really any dramatic all-in back and forths like 9 20 10. There weren't any massive chip leader declines within the foul table, at least. Obviously, one of Maris starts was on day 8, the foul table chip leader with 10 left, but it was forgettable, and it was enjoyable enough watching it live. I was rooting for Yachman, I think, back then, and Toby Lewis, but watching it here was a pretty poor ending to an overall relatively mediocre at best main event.
Yeah, I talked about how when we reviewed after the main event happened and we gave our reviews of it, that I kind of felt like Wyman made the fewest mistakes, and that's why he won. I don't want to go so far as to say like he just kind of backed into the win. I mean, he played his spots well. He was able to make that, call on the last hand. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of disappointing to see that, he just didn't make any mistakes while Maceras kind of melted down. Yachman punted off, Walton punted off, Jones punted off. Predict and Hutchinson didn't get anything going. Holzner and Jones also didn't get anything going. He just played the sort of best defensive poker. He protected his stack, made a couple calls when he needed to, and then just kind of won that way. It's more exciting to see a guy like Hui who swings for the fences and wins. But again, and I'm not blaming the editors or producers. They can only do whatever. You can only have whatever they have in terms of their material. And I obviously don't blame Weinman. I mean, congratulations to him. He seems like a nice guy. It's always a sweet moment to see him, with the big smile holding the bracelet at the end. That's always kind of nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, fairly forgettable main event overall. Besides some moments here and there, and especially early on, some of the flashier personalities being there, I don't really feel the need to go back and watch these episodes over again, maybe a couple clips here and there, but nothing that I can really hang my hat on and say, like, yes, I have to go see this right now.
Yeah, I don't think I was let down as much as it was of 2022, and it wasn't nearly as boring as 2019 was. So I may put this maybe in the bottom tier, but maybe not the very bottom. Also, I do have my personal bias having met and talked to some of these players here, so maybe that's part of it. And also, minute second 31 of episode 1 was pretty good too. Maybe the best part of the whole main event ever in history. But take away that, and you have some pretty viral hands, but you can also watch these hands in the main event of the YouTube, the What's the Poker YouTube channel with the highlights of day 7, day 5, day 6, whatever. You can find these hands in a less filtered version, and so you don't have to watch these to get those hands in your system.
Yeah, I mean, this is not the worst main event by far. I mean, there were others that I think were worse. It's a couple rungs off the bottom, but it is closer to the bottom than it is to the top, is how it's characterized.
But it does have the worst audio of any main event of all time, unfortunately. And so we can only hope that maybe that'll be fixed in 2024. But at the same time, there were so many production errors during the live streaming that I have a little bit of or a lack of confidence in that being the case. So we'll wait 9 months and see, but however long it'll take for them to make those episodes, but we'll find out then, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
As far as other poker stories, so obviously because we have the episodic version of this main event, we now no longer have the live streams of this main event. So we do have recorded for posterity the bits of me being in the background and as well as you. So that's at least there. But I want to draw your attention to Sam. So there was the Poker Masters on PokerGo the last couple of weeks, and I was very surprised because they'd show a final table, and maybe it finishes early, but they have more than one event happening concurrently. And so there'd be what they call bonus coverage of day 1 of event number 7 after the finished event number 6. And so if I just out of curiosity watched one of the live streams of this, and at the TV table, instead of the chip counts of the player, they just put big blinds and the VPIP. They put name, big blinds, and VPIP. And I was really taken aback by this. I don't know how I didn't like it personally. I'd rather just have both up there, big blinds and chip counts. How about you?
Yeah, same here. VPIP doesn't really matter as much. I mean, maybe it's nice to show, I don't know, every 50 hands, but every single hand you're showing the VPIP. I mean, I think that's a little weird.
Not to mention, when if you're watching a table and someone announces like a verbal bet, like I bet 1 million, you're not you can't tell from the big blind count how many big blinds that is, and
Right.
so it just seemed kind of strange that they do it like that. Like it's not like I say I bet 10 big blinds. Like that's not a legal poker thing to do. I don't think so.
That is weird,
That
yeah.
surprised me. Another thing I noticed was that the Hustler Live YouTube channel was suspended from YouTube, and they had to switch to Twitch. And so Ryan Feldman is trying to, maneuver out of the situation. I'm just surprised. I'm really curious what would have changed from YouTube or what they did wrong to prompt that. I'm just surprised. I wonder if this could be the end of the Hustler Live on YouTube channel.
Yeah, I mean, some people prefer Twitch over YouTube in terms of streaming. I think on Twitch it's easier to give donations and things and give shout outs and stuff. I don't know. I mean, good luck to them. I don't really have a problem with if it's on YouTube or Twitch. They both are free, so you can do whatever you want.
Right, but that's just a little story there. And then I
Yeah.
also saw an article saying that for the second sort of production season of the Big Game on Tour, Rob Gronkowski will be at the table, and so I'm actually very excited to watch that. I think Gronk kind of has a sort of the reputation of kind of being like a little bit of a dumb dumb, like an athlete dumb dumb, which I think is kind of a load of what, because it takes a lot of intelligence to be an NFL player, especially at the level he was at. But I am very curious to see if he is as good as Seymour is, or if he'll kind of ham it up for the camera. I really have no idea what to expect.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen him in some other stuff. He's a very personable guy. He's kind of right for these sorts of shows, just light entertainment.
Right.
Uh, throw him into the deep end and see how he does. It would be really hilarious to see him beat Phil Hellmuth in a hand and see Phil Hellmuth respond. So hopefully they can pair him with Hellmuth or Mattisau or somebody like that.
That'd be great. And again, he can afford $50,000 if he busts in a hand. So I won't feel bad for him if he loses a hand or two here and there. So I'll be very excited. And again, that actually got me like pretty amped, because I was pretty meh on the first two batches overall of the Big Game on Tour. So maybe this will be the start of something even more exciting for the future here. And perhaps the most exciting news of this past week was during two of Daniel Negreanu's streams of the World Series of Poker online, like the main event or the high roll or whatever. He gave two shout outs to our podcast. One on, I think it was like Monday and Tuesday or something like that. So that was pretty exciting too.
Yeah, we were able to both see the first shout out live together, which was pretty sweet.
Yeah, and I did capture both of those moments and put them on the channel, so you can check those out at your leisure to see the context of it. And again, it's just kind of funny because this is now now it's been a total of three shout-outs by Negreanu for our podcast on his stream. And again, having it kind of connects to when we met him and talked to him about it. So I'd like to think that maybe now in his brain our name of podcast like for good. But either way, it'd be pretty cool to be a part of that now in history.
That would be fun if he just managed to recognize us. Oh yeah, you're the two fish guys. That'd be cool.
Absolutely. And so on that note, guys, that's a pretty good podcast right there, about an hour 45 or so. We had a lot to talk about. Oh, and oh my God, I'm sorry, I almost forgot, Sam. Unfortunately, we have the recent tragic passing of James Earl Jones.
Mhm.
Again, he was arguably the main highlight of the film Finder's Fee, a poker film that we discussed a while back. That his character, his acting, everything was just really made that film. Without him, I think the film did not work nearly as well. And so unfortunately to see him go, but he was a member of the Hollywood sphere for many decades. He had a great body of work. I know that Star Wars is obviously his big, and like his Lion King are his big two things. But for me, it'll always be Finder's Fee in my heart for him. So rest in peace, James Earl Jones. We'll miss you.
Yeah, I was going to bring up him in case you'd forgotten,
Yeah.
but yeah, I felt that his performance in Finder's Fee is the best performance in any of the poker media that we've seen, whether it's television shows or movies. And honestly, like one of the few things in a poker movie or television show that I would say like is unequivocally great. Just the subtlety of his performance. Just, I don't want to spoil the movie in case you haven't seen it. Like what his performance does to help build up to the end, the the little twerks, quirks in his eyes, the little ways he delivers lines helps, just establish and set up what the ending turns out to be, which I think is remarkable. And obviously he did Star Wars, he did The Lion King, he was on the Broadway stage for many years, has a Broadway theater named after him, is one of very few actors who has a theater named after him. Total legend, and I hope that, his family and his friends are taking care of themselves.
Yeah. Looking on the future here, I think we're still waiting on the Mike Menasa documentary to come out for us to be able to review it. I'm still very eager to review that. I think there's another poker movie called Deal that I never heard of until recently that we might be able to watch and review in the future. That'll be something else to watch. But as always, guys, if you have anything that you want us to talk about, if you have your own comments to review, if you want to be a guest on our podcast, let us know in the comments section. We're happy to have you. We're always looking for someone new to join us and be a third member of the table for a few hours.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be like a full-fledged, 2-hour interview like we've done with previous people. If you just want to do a quick segment, we're happy to do that. If you want to keep your interview short, if you have a book or something or a movie you want to promote, we're happy to have you on. Whatever works for you, we're happy to have. And again, any poker content that's out there, if it's books, if it's television shows, if it's movies, it doesn't have to be specifically, only about poker. Poker can be a side element, just as long as it's related to poker in some capacity. We're not going to review some random movie. We're going to just keep focused on poker media here.
Exactly, guys. But that's all for now, guys. Until next time, enjoy your poker, enjoy your TV, and enjoy your poker on TV.
Take care, everyone.